Good day everyone. So as a bit of a follow-up to yesterday's video, let's sort of explore what high-level play is in Genshin Impact. Now this is something we have covered on the channel, so for those of you that have watched a lot of my videos, you'll understand this infographic quite well. But what I'll do today is I'll sort of try and break it down a bit more in a systematic way, and hopefully it'll all make sense. So you're just going to have to bear a bit with me as I explain some of the key fundamental concepts. So you can see there's this little green graph here on the right-hand corner. And you can imagine this as you going into the spiral abyss, you're fighting against the perpetual mechanical array, and let's say sometimes you notice, oh, it took you about 1 minute to clear him, sometimes it took you 50 seconds, sometimes 1 minute and 10, and so on. In other words, the outcomes that you get, and just do note that these outcomes do not need to be clearing times, they can also be damage outcomes, or it can be whatever outcome you want, but the outcomes you get in game for whatever purpose always has a bit of a spread, and this is what the x-axis means. It's the range of whatever that outcome is, and the y-axis would be the frequency. So what leads to these outcomes? Well, two kind of things. The first being your gear and your character level. So if you've got C6R5 characters, well, your damage outcomes are going to be obviously a lot higher than an F2P sort of level, and of course your skill expression. Now, this is what we mean in Genshin Impact. The highest level of play is concerned with reducing the variation or the margin for error that goes into your skill distribution. In other words, we want to ensure that the spread of outcomes as a result of you inputting and playing a certain rotation, animation cancelling, positioning, all these sorts of things, we want to ensure that this spread of outcomes is as small as possible so that we can reliably make the correct conclusion when we evaluate whatever in-game sort of outcomes. This is what we mean by high-level play. You see, a lot of people look at the outcomes of the game and they'll make a lot of false conclusions by not understanding what goes into it. Now, let's be very clear here. If you're someone that's into speed running, you've got C6R5 characters, your gear in and of itself far exceeds the damage threshold required in the spiral abyss to clear, and hence the margin for error does play less of a role. Your skill expression matters less because you can, in some cases, just purely unga bunga. But if you really look at the world record attempts, what you'll notice is that a lot of the times they'll play highly choreographed sequences. In other words, they're sort of using the correct skill expression so that they can have the best chance to sample the highest point, in other words, the right hand side here of the green little curve, to ensure that they get the best outcome. In other words, the fastest clearing time that they can then compare to other people. But for everything else, and this is what I've sort of pointed out in yesterday's video, high level play is much more informative than just sort of doing speedrunning and all this stuff, because assuming you've only got F2P gear and so on, skill expression does matter. But you might object and say, well, why does it practically matter? Why does skill expression matter when you can just button mash your way through? Well, here's the thing that some people don't understand. When you evaluate a character and their potential, you should play that character at their skill ceiling to get the most accurate reflection of the character's true potential. So let me give you an example. When Yae Miko came out, a lot of people said, oh, she's clunky to play. You have to Q, E. She doesn't have iframes on her E abilities and all of this good nonsense. And this is the thing. People looked at Yae not understanding that all of the complaints that they have can easily be bridged just by playing the character properly, just by using the correct form of skill expression. And this is the thing, once you've reduced that margin of error, that spread of outcomes attributable just to how you play the character and how you position, suddenly the outcomes that you're evaluating, i.e. how valuable is Yaimiko in my team, becomes much more clearer, and hence the picture or the recommendations that you're going to put out as to whether people should pull or use this character becomes much more meaningful. And this is what we mean by skill expression, and hence why it is so good. Now, an objection that I've seen from other people is that, look, I can just randomly mash buttons and I still get good outcomes. And certainly we don't deny this. There are certainly teams in the game that due to the way in which their abilities function and so on, you will not really be able to influence outcomes by anything you do in terms of how you position, animation cancel. Sometimes it's almost like certain abilities will play the game for you. And yes, that just means that the skill distribution has less of an influence, but this does also deny the fact that teams like Sukokumon, teams like your Hutao teams and so on, do require skill to be very, very effective. And you can clearly see the difference between people that are just randomly button mashing on Hutao and people that can play those animation cancels like pinpoint accurately and perfectly, ensuring the correct swirl and VV uptime, the double hydro mix, all these sorts of good things. And this is what always like frustrates me. Yes, there's a lot of variation in the game, but the lack of understanding of this variation leads people to make stupid statements like saying, well, skill doesn't matter, when in fact there's so many layers of this that we need to break down. And this is precisely what I tried to do in this video. And I think the final point that I want to make is, and you'll see it at the top right hand corner there, a lot of people dismiss high level gameplay due to their own natural progression and understanding of the game. You as a Genshin player are not the same player you were 2 years ago when the game started out. Just by naturally playing the game, by testing and so on, you would already start reducing the margin for error when you play the game and execute your abilities. And this is the thing that people are very disingenuous about. They're like, well, look, I can just randomly mash buttons, but you take it for granted that you mashing buttons is a form of skill expression that you've definitely subconsciously acquired over a very random person that sits with their mobile phone and half-heartedly tries to clear some sort of like level 80 hilichurl or whatever. And this is what I wanted to sort of point out. Skill expression is all about the skill distribution in the game. There are lots of things that also affect this, but I think it is disingenuous for people to just look at outcomes and ignore all of the inputs that goes into achieving those outcomes. And once you do that, you'll have hopefully a greater appreciation for the skill expression that there is in the game. This does not say that Genshin is the most skillful game. It's not a claim I'm making. It certainly is one of the easier games when it comes to combat and combat skill expression, but it does not negate the fact that your inputs into the game, your game knowledge, and all of these things, all of the components of what makes you a highly skilled player, still matters in the long run. It still ensures that you can have, at the very least, a very good and far more enriched gaming experience than someone that just randomly wishes to mash buttons. It allows for there to be more exploration in terms of the game, more replayability, and this is ultimately why high level play kind of matters. Now, you might dismiss it because of all sorts of reasons, but unless you can make a systematic breakdown like I've done here, I'm really not interested in the complaints, because all of the complaints that I've seen in my previous videos and I've heard previously in some sort of forums and discords and stuff regarding this sort of very topic have very much been non-constructive. And the moment people can make a constructive or a different or an alternative approach to deconstructing Genshin outcomes, until such a time, I'm really not going to let go of the fact that that skill expression does matter in the game. So yeah, this is the sort of high level framework. There's so much more that goes into this, but we'll definitely cover this more in the future as we get time. Cheers.